Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be talking about permissions, and we're going to be looking at a new document that we have in our user manual that will show all of the permissions and what each of those permissions do. So first, let's just do a quick review of how permissions work in the system. First, let's look at our security groups. That's on our System Settings menu and Security Groups. So you can see that I believe these are the default security groups that are sent to you when you become a member of Flex, or a customer of Flex, I should say. Each security group has its own permissions set to them. So for example, if we look at the administrators group, you can see that most of the permissions are granted. And then if we look at, for example, the shop text group, many of the permissions are denied, except for a lot of the inventory module permissions. A lot of those are granted. When you create a user in Flex, you assign them to a security group. So if we look at my user, you can see that I'm assigned to the administrators group, and therefore I will inherit the permissions of the administrators group. So if I click the permissions button for my username specifically, you can see they're all set to inherit, which means that I'm inheriting the permissions of the security group that I'm assigned to. You'll notice that these are all of the same granted or denied settings as the system administrator or the administrators group. So let's see what happens if we go back to System Settings, Security Groups, and then click on the permissions for administrators. And let's change a few of these. The ones that are denied, let's change to granted. And all changes are automatically saved. I'll leave these ones as denied. All changes are automatically saved on this screen. There's no save or update button, so as soon as you make the change, that's automatically saved. And then if we go back to System Settings, Users, and remember I'm assigned to the Administrators Security Group, so now my permissions will reflect the changes that I made. You can see that all of the ones I changed to granted are now granted for myself. One thing that I'll mention is that anytime a user's permissions are changed, they will have to log out and then log back in for those changes to take effect. A lot of times we will get a support message saying that they changed permissions for a user, but they're still not able to do certain things in the system. The simple fix is usually just to have that user log in or log out and then log back in for the changes to take effect. Okay, so now let's look at how you can actually go in and change the permissions for each user independent of their security group settings. So for example, let's look at this user here. You can see that she is assigned to the shop text group. If we look at her permissions, oh, that might be a bad example because I've already changed a lot of her permissions. So let's actually look at this one right here. Assigned to shop text. And then if we look at their permissions, you can see they're all set to inherit, and so he's inheriting the shop tech permissions. But let's say that this particular user, you want to be able to give them the ability to delete inventory items, but you don't want to give all shop techs that ability, so you're not going to change the shop tech permissions. You could just change his individual permission to granted. That's only going to change it for him. That's not going to affect any other member that's assigned to the shop text group. And so you can do that for each user. If we go back to that example we were looking at just a second ago, even though this user is assigned to shop text, I have granted almost every single permission in the system. In fact, this is the user that I was using to test all of the permissions as I was making the user manual document showing what all the permissions do. And so I see a question in the chat room, and that's where we're going now. You can select multiple user groups for a user. A lot of times we don't necessarily recommend this because, for example, if you're setting somebody as the administrator, then they're pretty much going to have all permissions in the system. So you don't have to assign them to accounting or account executive, excuse me, or any other group because they already have all their permissions. But one reason that you might want to assign them to multiple security groups, let's try just these few. There are some settings within Flex where you can restrict certain elements from being viewed and certain, I believe, workflow actions from being executed, and those are based on the group membership. So for example, let's look at Projects menu, Project Elements, and we'll look at Quote. And if we go to the Security tab, and you'll have a Security tab on any element. If you clicked on Invoice, Pull Sheet, any of these elements, you'll have the Security tab, and they all have the same security settings. So you could say the view group is only people who belong to administrators and accounting. So anybody that belongs to those groups can view the quote. Or you could say anybody can view the quote. If nothing's checked, that means anybody can view it, but only administrators, accounting, and sales reps can edit it. And so you can see that there are quite a few different of these groups that you can set up. One of the more popular ones that people use is the not responsible person view group. When you're setting up a quote, by default, the name that you put in the account manager field, that's what we call the responsible person. And so what this is saying is that only these groups that are checked can view the quote besides the responsible person. So whoever created the quote, whoever's the account manager of the quote, can view their own quotes, and then administrators and accounting can view all quotes, even though if they're not the responsible person. So that might be one reason why you would assign somebody to multiple groups so that they can be included in the security settings for an element so that they can view those particular elements. And another way, let's look at projects and workflow. And let's just look at the quote again. So for example, if there are certain workflow actions that you only want certain security groups to be able to execute, a really good one might be the generate invoice action. So when you create a quote, you start an inquiry. Anybody that can view quotes can click the confirm quote option, and then anybody can click or set it to ready to invoice. But then maybe you only want the generate invoice to be accessible by administrators or accounting. So if we click on the generate invoice workflow action, then you can give it an executor group. Let's say we only want administrators, we only want accounting to be able to execute this particular workflow action. And so now if a shop tech or a sales rep had a quote open, and if that quote was in ready to invoice status, they would not be able to click generate invoice. That's only going to be accessible by accounting and administrators. So that answers that question. Yes, you can select a user to be part of multiple groups, and that is a reason why you might want to do that. Again, just remember, anytime that you change a user's permissions, then you're going to have them log out and then log back in for the changes to take effect. So the last thing that we're going to look at, or actually one more thing that I'm going to mention, one of the reasons that I said that I sometimes don't recommend assigning to multiple groups is that we have gotten reports that sometimes if you assign somebody to a bunch of groups, and then if you look at their permission structure, sometimes, so for example, she was assigned to administrator, so you would think that all the administrator permissions would be granted. And most of them are, but you can see that there are a few that have slipped through the cracks. And this is probably just a bug that we have to address here at Flex. But if you do this and assign somebody to multiple groups, then we always recommend just going and checking their permissions and making sure that they have all the permissions that you want them to. So the last place we want to look, and I forgot to pull this up, so let me grab the copy of it, is the user manual section that is going to show all of these permissions and what they do. This is one of the bigger requests that we've gotten in the past. And so we finally were able to set aside some resources and get this complete. So just one second, I'm pulling this up on my other screen and I will post the link to everybody. Okay, and so this is just in our standard user manual, not our starter kit. And this is called the Permissions Glossary. I'm going to post that in the chat room. And now let me pull it up on my screen. And so the way that this is organized currently is exactly how the permissions page was organized. You'd notice that on the permissions page, each section is called a module. So you have the contact management module, the project management, financials, etc. And so we've organized the permissions glossary to reflect that page so it's easier to navigate. If you click on, let's actually look at inventory first. We've built a little table that has the permission name in one column, and the other column is the things that will happen if that permission is denied. We found that it was a little bit easier to say what happens when it's denied than what happens when the permission is granted, so that's why we organized it that way. So for example, if we look at can view inventory financial information, then if the permission is denied, the user will not be able to view the pricing tab, replacement cost, average cost, and purchase cost on inventory model pages. And if you go through each permission, you could see that it's set up exactly the same. You have the permission name, and then what happens if that permission is denied to a user. You'll notice that we have a few that still say more info soon. Some of these are ones that we just need to dig a lot deeper and have our development team help us understand exactly what these permissions are doing. And some of them are just permissions that I personally haven't tested yet. And so some of these are still in progress. And even some of the ones that you see content for, these are still in progress as well. Because some of these permissions actually go pretty deep, and there are some things that aren't quite as obvious that might be denied to a user. And so if you do see something on this list that you've noticed as you've denied permissions to users, and you've noticed that there's something that's being denied to that user that's not on this list, then please just send a message into support and let us know about that. Because like I said, this is a really large project. It takes a lot to go through and deny a user permission and then go through the whole system to see exactly what it's doing. And our development team is really busy right now, so it's hard to have them help us with the whole process. They are helping as much as they can, but they're busy with programming new features and helping make Flex better every day. So that's why this is still a work in progress, but I would say it's probably a good 85-90% complete right now. So we welcome you to check out this document. Again, that was just posted in the chat room. And for the video that we'll put on YouTube, we will put a link within the video so that you can easily get to that. So if you do have any other questions, or if you have any thing that you feel like needs to be added to the permissions glossary, then please email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.